Millionaire falls for shy waitress who speaks every language fluently. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was just another evening at La Belle Poche, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The glittering chandeliers cast long, warm shadows over the polished marble floors as the city's elite mingled, their voices a hum of whispered deals and laughter. In the corner, Alexander Hayes sat at his usual table, tapping his fingers against his expensive watch, irritation creasing his brow. A successful CEO, known for his sharp mind and even sharper business tactics, Alexander was no stranger to power. At 34, he had built a multi-billion-dollar empire, but despite his wealth, he remained as cold and detached as ever. He hated waiting, and tonight's blind date was the last thing he wanted. The woman he was supposed to meet hadn't arrived, and he found himself restless in the dimly lit room, surrounded by people, but feeling more alone than ever. His mind wandered as he fiddled with his glass of whiskey, the ice clinking against the crystal. A soft voice broke his concentration. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you anything else while you wait?" He looked up to find the waitress standing there, her posture straight, her smile polite, but there was something different about her. She wasn't like the others. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, while neat, was far more understated than the designer outfits that surrounded him. She didn't seem intimidated by him, or anyone else for that matter. "No, thank you. I'm waiting for someone," he replied curtly, already turning his attention back to his phone. But the waitress didn't leave. Instead, she lingered, her eyes studying him for a moment. "Would you like to order something while you wait?" she asked again, her voice calm and professional, yet with an undertone of something he couldn't quite place. He waved her off with a dismissive gesture, still irritated by the entire situation. She gave a small nod, then turned to leave, but paused just before walking away. "By the way, sir," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of curiosity, "that wasn't the correct way to pronounce steak au poivre in French." The words were soft, but they hit him like a jolt. Alexander blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. The waitress smiled gently, her eyes never wavering from his. "You said steak au poivre, but the accent was off. It should be poivre, not pwvre. If you'd like, I can teach you how to say it properly." For a moment, Alexander was stunned. Most people would have either fumbled over their words or tried to act like they didn't care, but this woman had just corrected him, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And not only that, she had done so without a hint of condescension, as if speaking French correctly was something everyone should know. "You speak French?" he asked, now genuinely intrigued. The waitress nodded, still calm and collected. "Fluently. I also speak Italian, Spanish, and a few other languages. I picked them up over the years." Alexander's curiosity piqued, but he didn't want to show it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk forming on his lips. "What else can you speak?" he asked, half mocking, half serious. She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Well, I can speak Arabic, German, and Japanese too," she said nonchalantly, as though it was no big deal. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you speak 6 languages fluently?" She smiled, the faintest hint of pride showing. "Yes, sir. 6. Alexander stared at her for a moment, completely thrown off by her unexpected response. This wasn't just a waitress. She was something else entirely, and he didn't know why, but he found himself wanting to know more about her. "Impressive," he said, his voice softer than before. "I have to admit, you've got my attention." The waitress simply smiled, her demeanor unchanged. "Thank you, sir. I'll be back to take your order shortly." As she walked away, Alexander couldn't help but watch her. There was something about her, something that didn't quite fit the mold of the usual servers he encountered in his high-powered world. She wasn't just another pretty face trying to impress him, nor was she intimidated by his wealth or status. For the first time in a long while, he felt intrigued by someone who didn't care about his title or his money. Little did he know, This encounter would change the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. The following evening, Alexander returned to La Belle Poche, eager to see the waitress again. He had hardly been able to stop thinking about her since their brief exchange the night before. The soft correction of his French, the calm, confident way she spoke about languages, it had all stayed with him. He walked into the restaurant, his sharp suit contrasting with the warm, intimate atmosphere of the place. He was greeted by the hostess, who immediately recognized him and led him to his usual table. As he sat down, his eyes scanned the room, but this time they were searching for one person. And there she was, moving effortlessly through the dining area, her movements graceful and confident. Her name was Christina Matthews. She hadn't noticed him yet, and for the first time in his life, Alexander felt a flutter of nerves. He wasn't used to feeling this way. He had control over everything in his life, from his business to his social interactions. But with Christina, it was different. As she passed by his table, their eyes met for just a moment, and she gave him a small, polite smile. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice smooth and professional, yet warm. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Water for now," Alexander replied, his voice steady, but his mind racing. He watched as she moved to another table, serving drinks and greeting guests with the same quiet grace. There was an elegance to her that went beyond her appearance. It was in the way she carried herself, in the way she interacted with the customers, like she was part of the space, both invisible and indispensable at once. Christina returned shortly with his water, setting it down in front of him with a soft smile. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked, her tone friendly but professional. Alexander hesitated for a moment, his usual confidence faltering. "Actually, yes," he said, surprising himself. "I was wondering, if you had time, maybe you could explain more about your language skills. I'm genuinely curious." She looked at him for a second, her expression unreadable, before nodding. "I'd be happy to explain, sir, but I'm afraid I can't talk for too long. It's a busy night." "Of course," Alexander said quickly. "I'd just like to know how you came to learn so many languages." "6, was it?" Christina nodded, folding her hands in front of her. "Yes, I grew up in a family that valued education. My parents were both linguists, so learning languages came naturally to me. It was more of a necessity than a choice, honestly." "That's impressive," Alexander said, leaning back in his chair, genuinely fascinated now. Most people wouldn't think a waitress could speak 6 languages. Christina's eyes flickered for a moment, her guard going up. "Well, not everyone is in a position to share their talents. Some of us have to do what we can to survive." Alexander's curiosity deepened. "What do you mean by that?" She hesitated, clearly not wanting to go into detail, but after a moment, she sighed and sat down across from him. "I used to work as a translator for a while, but life changes. I left that behind for personal reasons." "What kind of reasons?" he pressed, leaning forward. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Things happen. People change. Sometimes it's just easier to walk away and start fresh. I've been able to help people in smaller ways, and that's enough for me now." Alexander studied her for a moment, his mind turning over what she had said. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She had chosen a humble life, despite her clear potential for much more. "I think you're selling yourself short," he said, surprising himself with the words. "I can't help but think that you could do more, achieve more." She smiled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes, the life we choose isn't about achieving more. It's about finding balance, peace." Alexander was taken aback by her answer. He was used to people striving for success, constantly pushing for more. He had built his empire on that very principle. But with Christina, he couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her grounded nature. "I see," he said, his voice softer now. "So, what would you do if you didn't have to wait tables?" Christina considered the question for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "If I had the opportunity, I would probably go back to translating. Maybe even teach languages. But it's not something I can focus on right now." "And what if I offered you the chance to do that again? No more waiting tables, no more struggling to make ends meet." Christina looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you offering exactly?" Alexander took a deep breath. "I could offer you a position in my company. A translator for international projects. You'd be well compensated, with the resources to do what you love." Christina's face softened, but she didn't say anything for a long time. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. But I'm happy where I am. I don't need to chase more money or status. I've learned that the hard way. Alexander sat back, his mind reeling. He had expected her to be intrigued, maybe even tempted. But she wasn't. She was content. And that made her even more fascinating. I understand, he said, his voice sincere. But if you change your mind, she nodded, her expression still calm. I'll let you know. As she walked away, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he had just met someone who wasn't interested in the things he thought mattered most. And for the first time, he was questioning his own priorities. The following week, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Christina. Her words from their last conversation echoed in his mind. And despite the luxury of his high-rise office, despite the deals and the meetings that should have been his main focus, he found himself looking out the window, wondering about her life. He had tried to push thoughts of her aside, but there was something about her, her quiet confidence, the way she carried herself, her refusal to be defined by others, that intrigued him in a way no one else had in years. That night, he made a decision. He would return to La Belle Poche, but this time, he wouldn't just sit at the same table and wait for her to come to him. He would talk to her, learn more, and maybe, just maybe, convince her to accept the opportunity he had offered. As he entered the restaurant, the familiar warmth of the place wrapped around him. The soft clink of glasses, the quiet murmur of conversation. The scent of freshly prepared dishes. It was all part of the ambience he had come to appreciate over the years. But tonight, he wasn't focused on the restaurant or its patrons. His eyes scanned the room, and there she was. Christina. She moved between tables with grace, her presence barely noticeable, but somehow essential to the flow of the evening. She was busy, as usual, but tonight, Alexander wasn't going to wait for her to come to him. He stood up and walked over to her, catching her attention just as she was delivering a drink to another table. Christina, he said, his voice calm but firm. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there. Mr. Hayes, she replied, offering a polite smile, but there was something guarded in her eyes. What can I do for you? I'd like to talk to you, if you have a moment, he said, his gaze steady. She hesitated, glancing around at her other tables before nodding. I'll be right with you. A few minutes later, she returned, wiping her hands on a towel as she approached him. What's on your mind? She asked, standing at a distance, still maintaining her professional demeanor. Alexander could see the wall she had built around herself. He knew this wouldn't be easy. I've been thinking about our conversation, he said, his voice low. And I want to apologize if I came off as too forward. But I'm serious about offering you that job. Christina crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. I've already told you, Mr. Hayes, I'm not interested. I'm happy with my life the way it is. Alexander took a deep breath. I understand that. But I can't shake the feeling that you're hiding something, Christina. You have so much potential, and I don't think you should limit yourself. You could be doing so much more. More? She asked, her tone sharp. More than waiting tables, you mean? More than helping people like you with your orders and your overpriced meals. Her words stung, but Alexander didn't back down. That's not what I meant, he said, his voice calm. I'm talking about the skills you have. The languages, the intelligence. You could be doing something important, and I want to help you get there. Christina's expression softened, but only slightly. I don't need your help, she said quietly. I'm fine. I'm doing the best I can, and that's enough for me. Alexander could see the struggle in her eyes, the conflict between her desire for independence and the reality of her situation. But what if you could do more, without giving up your independence? He asked, his voice earnest. What if I could offer you the resources to make your dreams a reality? You wouldn't have to wait tables anymore, and you could focus on what you're truly passionate about. Christina shook her head, her lips pressed into a tight line. You don't get it. It's not about the money, or the title, or the job. It's about living a life that's meaningful on my terms. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Alexander watched her, sensing the walls she had built around herself. But he also saw the potential, the spark of something more, something she wasn't allowing herself to embrace. I get it, he said softly. But I think you deserve more than what you're settling for. Christina didn't respond immediately. She looked at him, her gaze steady and searching, as though trying to understand why someone like him, who had everything, would care about someone like her. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hayes, but it's not for me. I'm not looking for a way out. I'm not looking for a way up. I just want to live my life the way I want to, without anyone telling me what I should do. Alexander nodded slowly, a sense of respect growing within him. I understand, he said, his voice steady. But if you ever change your mind, I'm here. And I'll always believe in your potential, whether you take the job or not. Christina looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, she seemed to let her guard down, just slightly. Thank you, she said quietly, before turning and walking away. Alexander watched her go, feeling a strange sense of pride for her decision, even if it wasn't what he had hoped for. He knew that sometimes the hardest thing to do was to walk away from an opportunity, and Christina had made that choice with her head held high. As he sat back down, Alexander realized that his admiration for her had only grown stronger. She wasn't just a waitress, and she wasn't just someone to be helped. She was someone who had made a life for herself, on her own terms. And in that, she had found something far more valuable than money or success, self-respect. The next few days passed quietly at La Belle Poche, but beneath the calm surface, something in the air felt different. Christina sensed it before she even saw him. There was a shift in the way the maitre d' looked toward the entrance, a slight hush that traveled through the room like a soft wave, and when she turned, there he was. Alexander Hayes. Not in his usual tailored suit, not with his usual air of untouchable confidence. Tonight, he stood at the entrance with a look she had never seen on him before. He looked uncertain. He waited until she finished serving a nearby table before approaching. She noticed the way he walked, slower than usual, as if the weight of something unseen pressed on him. When he reached her, he paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Christina," he said, his voice lower than she expected. "I was hoping I could talk to you again." She inhaled quietly, steadying herself. "Mr. Hayes, this is not really the best time. I have several tables tonight." "I know," he replied. "I will keep it brief." His tone was sincere, and for a moment, she saw a glimpse of someone behind the polished exterior, someone who was trying. "All right," she said quietly. "One moment." She finished checking on her tables, then returned to him near the service station where the ambient noise would mask their conversation. "What is it?" she asked. "I wanted to apologize." "Truly," he said, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his cuff. "I realize I overstepped. I kept pushing my idea of success onto you, without ever stopping to think that maybe your definition is different from mine." Christina looked at him, searching his face for any trace of condescension or hidden motive. Instead, she found something she never expected. Vulnerability. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate that." Alexander nodded slowly. "But that is not the only reason I am here tonight." She waited, unsure of what he might say next. "There is something I need your help with," he continued, surprising her. "Something only you can help with." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Only me?" "Mr. Hayes, I am sure you have plenty of qualified people who can handle anything you need." "Not for this," he said firmly. "It is about a dinner I am hosting tomorrow. A very important one. Leaders from several international branches will be there. We are finalizing a project proposal, and communication has been difficult. I need someone who can bridge the language gaps." Christina blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his request. "You want me to assist?" "I do," he replied. "If you are willing. It would only be for one evening. I know you said you are not interested in a full-time position, and I respect that. But this is different. This is not a job offer. This is a request for help. A request, not an order, not an offer wrapped in power." Something about that softened her. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because," he said, meeting her eyes, "you understand people. You do not just speak languages. You see them. You listen. And right now, that is exactly what I need." Something inside her shifted, a quiet recognition of honesty. She exhaled slowly. "I would need to check the schedule first," she said. "I cannot abandon my shift without approval." "I already spoke with the restaurant manager," Alexander admitted. "He said you could take the evening off if you wanted to." She raised an eyebrow. "You spoke to him first?" A faint, almost embarrassed smile touched his lips. "Yes, I wanted to respect your time, and I did not want to put you in a position where you might get in trouble for helping." She studied him, seeing the effort he had made to approach her the right way. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want to be clear that it is not a step toward anything beyond tomorrow night." "Understood," Alexander replied immediately. "This is simply help. Nothing more." Those words settled something inside her, easing the hesitation. "All right," she said softly. "I will help." Relief washed over his face in a subtle but unmistakable way. "Thank you, Christina. Truly." She nodded once. "I will meet you there tomorrow. But remember, I am only doing this because I want to, not because I owe you anything." "I would never think otherwise," he said gently. As he left the restaurant that evening, Christina watched him walk out into the cool night air. For the first time, she did not feel like he was trying to pull her into his world. Instead, it felt like he was inviting her to stand beside him for just a moment, not above, not below, but as equals. And that small shift, quiet yet undeniable, lingered with her long after he was gone. The evening of the dinner arrived faster than Christina had anticipated. The entire day had been filled with little more than quiet preparation, but as she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her simple dress, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wasn't nervous about the dinner itself, or even the possibility of speaking in front of a room full of influential people. What unsettled her was the fact that she was about to enter Alexander Hayes' world once again. As she finished adjusting her collar, she glanced at the clock. It was nearly time. She quickly grabbed her purse, gave herself one last look, and headed out the door. The night air was cool against her skin as she made her way to the event. The walk to the venue felt longer than usual, each step punctuated by the tension she tried to shake off. When she arrived at the venue, the grand entrance of the restaurant loomed before her. A line of sleek cars was parked in front, their polished surfaces reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. The heavy wooden doors opened, and she stepped inside. The space was elegantly adorned, a stark contrast to the casual atmosphere she was used to. The warm golden lighting created a sense of exclusivity, and the chatter of well-dressed guests filled the room. She immediately noticed Alexander, standing near a corner, his sharp suit blending in with the luxurious surroundings. He spotted her almost instantly, his expression softening as he made his way toward her. "Christina," he greeted her with a warm smile, his tone much different than the usual businesslike edge. "I'm glad you could make it." She smiled politely, but could feel the weight of his gaze lingering longer than expected. "Of course," she replied. "I said I would." "Right," he said, his voice low. "And I'm grateful for it. Let's get you settled. I'll introduce you to some of the guests." Christina followed him, feeling the eyes of the room briefly flicker in her direction, no doubt drawn to her understated elegance in contrast to the glittering crowd. As they walked through the venue, Alexander's presence seemed to command the room. She couldn't help but notice the way people responded to him, how they deferred to his opinions, how they hung on his every word. He moved through the space like a force, but there was something different about the way he interacted with her. He didn't just talk to her as a subordinate or an employee. There was a certain respect in his voice that she hadn't expected. After a few introductions, Alexander led her to a private corner of the room where a few other key figures were gathered. They welcomed her with polite smiles, but Christina felt an immediate disconnect. The conversation was filled with numbers, projections, and financial jargon, things she had no interest in. She nodded along, her thoughts drifting as she observed the people around her. Her eyes wandered back to Alexander, who was engaged in conversation with a prominent investor. As he spoke, she noticed something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't the cool, calculated businessman she had grown accustomed to. There was warmth there, an openness that she hadn't expected. It was as if, for a brief moment, she caught a glimpse of something real beneath the surface. Before she could think further on it, Alexander turned toward her, his gaze landing on her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Christina," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet corner, "I'd like you to meet someone." The room seemed to quiet as a well-dressed woman stepped forward, offering her hand with a friendly smile. "It's nice to meet you," the woman said warmly. "I've heard so much about you from Mr. Hayes. He speaks very highly of you." Christina's heart skipped a beat. She turned to Alexander, who was now standing beside her, his posture relaxed but his expression intent. "I hope you don't mind," he said with a slight smile. "I may have mentioned a thing or two about your language skills." Christina blinked, taken aback. "You've been talking about me?" she asked, unsure of what to make of his words. Alexander chuckled, a sound that seemed genuine. "Not in the way you think. But yes, I've shared a few things with the people I work with." "You're impressive, Christina." His words caught her off guard. She had always expected to be dismissed, to be seen as just another face in the crowd, but tonight felt different. Alexander didn't just see her as the waitress who spoke multiple languages. He saw her as someone of value, someone with something to offer. As the evening wore on, Christina found herself caught between two worlds. The conversation around her swirled with talk of numbers and business ventures, but she couldn't help but feel the subtle pull of Alexander's presence. It wasn't just his wealth that intrigued her, it was his genuine interest in her. He wasn't trying to push her into a mold, or to make her fit into his vision of success. He was simply offering her the opportunity to be seen. By the time dinner was served, Christina had managed to find a quiet moment for herself, stepping away from the crowd to the balcony that overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking, the lights of Manhattan twinkling below like stars scattered across the night sky. She took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had happened. The evening had shifted something inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. She had always been content with her life, her work, and her independence. But something about tonight, the way Alexander had treated her, the way he had respected her, made her question if there was more waiting for her beyond the walls she had built. She wasn't sure what that more looked like, or if it even mattered. But one thing was clear, Alexander Hayes had done something no one else had ever done. He had made her feel like she was more than just a waitress. The following days after the dinner passed quietly, but the effect it had on Christina lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about Alexander. Not just because he had treated her with respect, but because he had opened a door she hadn't known was there. As a waitress, she had learned to stay in the background, unseen and unheard. But that night, she had felt something different. She had felt seen. Alexander didn't see her as a mere server. He saw her potential, her ability. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if she had been holding herself back, if she had been too content in the shadows. But there was still something that held her back. She knew the risks of stepping into a world that wasn't hers, of accepting something more than what she had made for herself. She had built a life, a routine, a sense of safety. She wasn't sure she was ready to let it go. A few days later, her thoughts were interrupted by a message on her phone. It was from Alexander. "Can we meet for coffee? I'd like to talk about something important." She stared at the message for a long moment, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to continue with her simple life, untouched by the complicated world he represented. But another part of her was curious, eager to understand why he had reached out again. She agreed to meet him. The next morning, Christina found herself in a small cafe across the street from her apartment. She was early, which gave her time to think. She ordered a simple coffee, black, just the way she liked it, and waited. The door chimed as Alexander walked in, and her heart skipped a beat. He was dressed casually today, in a dark jacket and jeans, but his presence still commanded attention. He spotted her almost immediately, his eyes locking onto hers with that same intensity she had come to recognize. "Christina," he said, his voice warm but serious. "Thank you for meeting me." She smiled politely but didn't speak immediately, unsure of what he wanted. He sat across from her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he began, "and I realized I might not have fully explained why I asked for your help the other night." Christina raised an eyebrow, curious. "You don't owe me any explanation," she said, her voice steady. "I agreed to help, and I did. That's it." Alexander shook his head slightly. "It's not that simple," he said. "You see, when I asked you to help with the dinner, I wasn't just looking for someone who could translate. I was looking for someone who could teach me something. I've spent my life building an empire, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters. You reminded me of that." Christina blinked, taken aback by his words. "I don't understand," she said softly. "How could I possibly teach you anything? You have everything." Alexander leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You have something I don't, Christina. You have the ability to connect with people in a way I've forgotten how to. You see beyond the surface. You understand more than just the words. And that's something I want to learn." Christina didn't know how to respond. She had never thought of herself as someone with the ability to teach anyone anything, let alone a powerful CEO. She had always been in the background, a quiet observer of the world around her. But now, Alexander was asking her to do something she never imagined. "I'm not sure what you're asking me to do," she said slowly. I'm just a waitress. Alexander smiled, a soft, understanding smile. You're not just a waitress, Christina. You're so much more. I want you to teach me, not just languages, but how to truly connect with people again. How to see the world through their eyes, not just through the lens of business and profit. She felt a weight in his words, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. She had always believed in the power of human connection, in the importance of understanding others. But she had never imagined that someone like Alexander Hayes would see value in that. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, she said quietly. I'm not a teacher. I don't have the credentials, the experience. You don't need credentials, he replied firmly. You have something far more important. You have empathy. You have wisdom. And that's what I need. Christina looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. She had spent so long protecting herself from the world, afraid of what would happen if she stepped out of her comfort zone. But here was an opportunity to step into something bigger, something that might change her life. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something more, something worth pursuing. I'll help you, she said softly, her voice steady. But only if you promise me something. Alexander's eyes brightened, a flicker of hope in his gaze. Anything, he said. Promise me that you'll never try to change who I am, she said, her voice firm. I'm not here to fix you, Alexander. I'm here to help you. See what's already there. You have to be willing to accept that. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. I promise, he said quietly. I won't try to change you. I just want to learn from you. Christina nodded, feeling a sense of resolution settle within her. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for sure. It was the right choice. She was ready to step out of the shadows and into a new chapter of her life. And maybe, just maybe, she could help Alexander find something he had been searching for all along. Christina kept her promise. She began working with Alexander, but it wasn't easy. At first, it felt like stepping into a world she wasn't quite prepared for. Their meetings were filled with lessons in empathy, communication, and understanding, but every step forward felt like she was walking on unfamiliar ground. Alexander had asked her to teach him how to connect with people, to see beyond the surface, and to engage with others on a deeper level. It was challenging, not just because of the lessons themselves, but because she had to confront parts of herself she had buried for years. She had always been independent, self-sufficient, and proud of her ability to navigate life without relying on anyone. But now, as she worked with him, she found herself questioning whether she had been holding herself back for fear of vulnerability. One afternoon, a few weeks after they had begun their sessions, Alexander invited her to his office. It wasn't a typical meeting. There was no agenda, no project to discuss. It was just the two of them, and the conversation was personal. As she entered his office, she was surprised to see how much more relaxed he seemed. The usual stiff demeanor he wore at the restaurant had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed more comfortable in his own skin. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said, his voice softer than usual, about what you've taught me. Christina didn't speak right away, unsure of what to say. She had taught him so much, about communication, about the power of listening, about connecting with others. But what had he learned? You've helped me see things differently, he continued, his gaze steady. I've spent so much of my life focusing on business, on success, on building an empire. I've neglected the most important thing, people. You've made me realize that my success isn't just about money or power. It's about the connections I make with others. Christina listened carefully, her heart stirring with something she hadn't expected. She had always believed in the importance of human connection, but hearing him acknowledge it, hearing him recognize her contribution, made her question her own hesitations. I'm glad to hear that, she said finally. But it's not just about changing your perspective. It's about embracing it. It's about being willing to listen, to understand, and to see the world through someone else's eyes. That's not easy. It takes courage. I know, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. It's something I've struggled with for a long time, but I'm ready to embrace it. I want to learn how to connect with people, not just on a professional level, but on a personal one. Christina felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was strange, hearing those words from him, hearing him express a desire for something more than just business. She had never imagined that someone like Alexander, who had everything, would care about something as simple, yet profound, as connection. You're already on the right path, she said softly. The hardest part is just being willing to try. You've taken the first step. He smiled, a genuine, almost childlike smile, and for the first time, Christina saw a glimpse of the man he had been before the empire, before the corporate world, before the weight of expectations had changed him. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. Christina nodded, but something inside her was stirring. She hadn't expected to feel so deeply moved by his words. She hadn't expected to feel so connected to him, not just as a colleague, but as a person. In that moment, she realized how much she had changed too. She had entered this world with a set of boundaries, with walls built high to protect herself. But with Alexander, those walls had started to crumble. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let him in completely, but there was something undeniably real between them. As the day wore on, Christina left the office feeling a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. The connection she had forged with Alexander had shifted something within her. She wasn't just teaching him anymore. She was learning from him too. And for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of something more. Something beyond the life she had built for herself. Maybe she could have both, the independence she valued and the connections she craved. Maybe there was room for both in her life. But she wasn't ready to make any decisions just yet. All she knew was that she was no longer walking the path alone. And that thought, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel as terrifying as it once had. Christina's days with Alexander continued, each one unfolding in unexpected ways. The more they worked together, the more she began to see him as more than just the powerful CEO he appeared to be. There was depth to him, a complexity hidden beneath the suit and the boardroom bravado. The way he listened, the way he absorbed every lesson she offered, it wasn't just about business for him anymore. He genuinely wanted to change, to become a better person, to connect with the world around him. Christina had always thought of herself as someone who kept people at a distance. She had built a life that was hers, independent and self-sufficient. But the more she spent time with Alexander, the more she realized how much she had been missing. There was a quiet kind of power in the connections people made with one another, in the small, everyday moments that formed the fabric of their lives. And Alexander had taught her something important too, about vulnerability, about letting someone else in. They had been meeting regularly, working through lessons on communication, empathy, and connection. But now, there was something more between them. The lines between their professional relationship and something more personal were starting to blur. Alexander had changed, and so had she. One evening, after a particularly intense discussion about the role of power in human relationships, Christina found herself sitting in a quiet park near the city, her mind racing. It had been weeks since that dinner, and while she had enjoyed their sessions, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening between them. There was a growing closeness, an unspoken tension, and for the first time in a long while, Christina wasn't sure what to do with it. As she sat on the bench, lost in thought, she felt a familiar presence beside her. She turned to see Alexander sitting next to her, looking at the city lights in the distance. "I didn't expect to find you here," she said, surprised to see him so far from the world he usually inhabited. "I come here when I need to think," he said quietly. "This place, it's where I can actually hear myself, away from the noise." She nodded, understanding. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts, the cool evening air settling around them. Christina had always been comfortable in silence, but now, with Alexander sitting so close, it felt different. The air between them seemed charged, and for the first time, she wondered if he was feeling it too. "Christina," he said after a while, breaking the silence. "There's something I need to say." She turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about us, about everything we've been learning together," he began, his voice soft but steady. "And I realized something. I don't just want to connect with people better. I don't just want to be a better leader. I want to be a better person. And that starts with being honest, with myself and with you." Christina felt her breath catch in her throat. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She hadn't expected him to say that, to admit so openly that what they were building wasn't just about professional growth. It was about something more, something personal. She didn't know what to say at first. "Alexander, she started, unsure of where her words would take her. But he gently placed a hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "Christina, I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I appreciate you. Not just for what you've taught me, but for who you are. You've made me see the world differently, and in doing so, you've changed me. I don't know where this goes from here, but I just want to be honest about what I'm feeling." She met his gaze, her heart racing as she processed his words. He wasn't just speaking to her as a mentor or a colleague anymore. He was speaking to her as someone who had become important to him, as someone who mattered. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like that. She had always been the one to hold back, to keep people at arm's length. But now, with Alexander, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. "I've been afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid of letting someone in. Afraid of what it might mean." "Afraid of what?" he asked, his voice gentle, his eyes full of understanding. "Afraid that if I let myself get too close, I'll lose myself. I've spent so long building this life, this independence, and I've always thought I had to keep it that way. But now," her voice faltered as she struggled to find the right words. "Now, I don't know what to think. You've made me realize there's more to life than just keeping my distance. But I don't know if I'm ready to change everything." Alexander's gaze softened, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to change everything, Christina. You don't have to be anyone you're not. But if you're willing to take a chance, to see where this connection could go, I'm here. And I'm not asking for you to make any decisions right now. Just to be open, to explore what's there." His words were like a lifeline, pulling her out of the darkness of uncertainty. She had always been so sure of herself, so certain of the path she had chosen. But with Alexander, there was a possibility, a chance to explore something deeper, something real. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take that step. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Ready to see where this goes." Alexander smiled, his eyes lighting up with something unspoken between them. It was a quiet promise, a mutual understanding. And as they sat there, side by side, both uncertain of what the future held but willing to face it together, Christina felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Weeks passed, and Christina found herself growing more comfortable with the new dynamics of her relationship with Alexander. Their work together had evolved into something deeper, but neither of them was willing to rush things. Alexander continued to meet with her regularly, discussing not only the professional lessons she had taught him, but also how he was applying them to his life. He had become a more thoughtful leader, more attuned to the needs of those around him. And Christina? She was learning just as much. She had spent years keeping her emotions at bay, building walls to protect herself from the world. But with Alexander, the walls began to feel unnecessary. For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to open up to someone in a way she hadn't done in years. Their connection was undeniable, but the question of whether they were ready to cross the line between colleagues and something more lingered. One evening, after a particularly intense conversation about their shared goals, Alexander invited her to dinner. It was a small, quiet gathering at a restaurant he often frequented, a place that held sentimental value to him. It was the kind of place where the walls weren't covered in marble or gold, but in history and memory. They arrived, and the moment Christina stepped inside, she could feel the weight of the occasion. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a moment in time. They were no longer two people simply exchanging lessons. They were two people who had learned from each other in ways that neither expected. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed easily, as it always did. But tonight, there was a different kind of energy between them. It wasn't the quiet energy of two professionals discussing their work. It was the energy of two people who had spent time together, shared ideas, and explored the boundaries of their relationship. "Christina," Alexander said, his voice soft but filled with intent, "I've been thinking a lot lately about what comes next, about everything we've talked about what I've learned, about what I'm still learning." She looked at him, her gaze steady, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "I've learned too," she replied, her voice just as calm. "I've learned that there's more to life than work, than independence, than self-sufficiency, that there's room for connection." Alexander smiled, but it wasn't the usual business smile. It was a smile of recognition, of understanding. "I think I've learned the same thing," he said. "I've spent so much of my life chasing success, but I've come to realize that true success is about the connections we make, the people we choose to let into our lives. And right now, I want to choose you." The words hung in the air. Between them, powerful and vulnerable. Christina felt a rush of emotions, but she didn't know how to respond. It wasn't that she didn't feel the same way. She did. But she had always been cautious, always held back, afraid of what would happen if she gave too much. Alexander reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers. "I don't expect anything from you, Christina," he said gently. "I just want you to know that I'm here, and I want to see where this goes, whatever it is." Christina's heart raced as she processed his words. She had spent so long protecting herself from the unknown, from getting too close to anyone. But with Alexander, it felt different. It didn't feel like pressure. It felt like an invitation. An invitation to explore something real, something that could change both of their lives. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared of losing myself, of losing what I've worked for." Alexander squeezed her hand gently, his touch reassuring. "You won't lose yourself, Christina. You'll find a new version of yourself, one that's stronger, more whole. You won't lose what's important. You'll just learn to let someone else in." Christina looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch, the comfort in his words. She had never let anyone in like this before. But maybe, just maybe, it was time. She looked back up at him, her gaze steady. "I'm willing to try," she said softly. Alexander's smile was filled with relief, with gratitude, and with something deeper, something that neither of them had fully understood until that moment. "That's all I needed to hear," he said, his voice full of emotion. As they finished dinner, the rest of the evening passed in a haze of laughter and easy conversation. The walls between them had dissolved, and in their place was a sense of mutual understanding, a quiet promise to explore what lay ahead. As they walked out of the restaurant, side by side, Christina felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had made the choice to take a step forward, to embrace something new, something unknown. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Christina and Alexander continued to work together, but now there was something new between them, a sense of closeness, of mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that went beyond the professional lessons they had started with. Alexander was more than just a CEO now. He was someone she could talk to, someone who had become a part of her life in ways she hadn't expected. And for the first time in a long time, Christina allowed herself to be open to the idea that maybe there was more to life than just independence and self-reliance. But despite their growing connection, she still struggled with the idea of what it meant to truly let someone in. She had spent years building her walls, guarding her heart, and it wasn't easy to tear them down. One night, after a particularly long day at work, Christina sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone. She had received a message from Alexander earlier in the day, asking if she would be available for dinner. She had agreed, but now, as the time drew near, she felt the familiar anxiety creep in. It wasn't just about the dinner, it was about what it represented. Was she ready to take the next step? She didn't have the answer, but she knew she couldn't keep running from the possibility. She put her phone down and stood up, pacing the room. The decision to let Alexander in wasn't just about him. It was about her. It was about trusting herself, trusting that she had the strength to embrace something new without losing herself in the process. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She was ready. She had to be. That night, as she walked into the restaurant, her heart pounded in her chest. Alexander was already seated at their usual table, his familiar smile waiting for her. When he saw her, his eyes softened, and for a moment, it was like the rest of the world disappeared. "Christina," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm glad you could make it." She smiled, but her nerves were still there, just beneath the surface. "Of course," she said, taking a seat across from him. "I wouldn't miss it." They ordered their food, but the conversation that followed was different from their usual discussions. Tonight, there was a sense of vulnerability in the air, a quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. "I've been thinking a lot," Alexander said after a few moments of silence. "About everything that's happened between us. About how far we've come." Christina's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I mean, I've learned so much from you, Christina, but I've also realized something important. I've realized that I can't keep living my life the way I've been. I can't keep hiding behind the walls I've built, and I don't want to keep holding back with you." His words struck her like a thunderbolt. She had heard him talk about change before, but this was different. This was raw, real, and personal. She felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Scared of what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Scared of letting go. Scared of letting someone else in and not knowing what comes next." Alexander reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. "Not with me. I know we've both been through our own journeys, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm not asking for anything from you except that you be honest with me. Be real." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch. She had been so afraid of losing herself, but in that moment, with him, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't known she was missing. "I want to be real," she said quietly, her heart finally opening up. "I want to be honest with you, but it's not easy for me. I've spent so long protecting myself, building this wall around me that I don't know how to take it down." Alexander's thumb brushed over her hand, a reassuring touch. "You don't have to take it down all at once," he said. "We can do this at your pace. But I need you to know that I'm here, and I want to see where this goes. I want to take this journey with you." Christina's breath caught in her chest. She had been so afraid of losing herself, but now, she felt the possibility of something beautiful unfolding in front of her. Something she hadn't dared to imagine before. "I want that too," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to see where this goes. I want to be with you, Alexander. I just need to take it one step at a time." Alexander smiled, a genuine smile, and she felt her heart soften. "We'll take it one step at a time," he promised. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and shared stories. But the weight of what had been said between them lingered in the air, filling the space with a quiet understanding. Christina didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to let go of her fears and embrace the future with open arms. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally let someone in without losing herself in the process. The days that followed were filled with quiet understanding and unspoken promises. Christina and Alexander had taken that first step, and now, they moved forward together, not rushing but savoring each moment. The connection they had was real, and while they had agreed to take things slowly, there was no denying the bond that was growing between them. Christina found herself thinking about him more and more. It wasn't just the lessons they had shared, but the way he made her feel. She had never imagined that a person could make her feel so seen, so valued. Alexander was different, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what that meant. One evening, after another long day at work, Christina arrived home and saw a message from Alexander. It was a simple text, just asking how her day had gone. It was a small thing, but it made her smile. She hadn't realized how much she had come to enjoy their conversations, even the small, everyday exchanges. She sat down on the couch, her phone in hand, and replied, telling him about her day. She didn't expect an immediate response, but within minutes, her phone buzzed again. "Would you like to meet me for dinner tomorrow night?" The message read. She stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a rush of warmth spread through her chest. It had been weeks since they had shared a dinner, just the two of them, and while their relationship had grown deeper in other ways, she missed the simple moments they had shared. She quickly typed her response, "I'd love to." The next evening, they met at a cozy little bistro on the outskirts of the city. It was a far cry from the grandiose restaurants they had frequented before. This place was small, intimate, with soft lighting and the hum of quiet conversations filling the air. It felt like a secret, a quiet refuge from the world outside. Alexander was already there when Christina arrived, sitting at a corner table near the window. He stood up when she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice warm and genuine. Christina felt her cheeks flush, but she smiled, her heart skipping a beat. "Thank you," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. The evening passed in comfortable silence, punctuated by laughter and shared stories. They talked about everything and nothing, about the things that mattered, and the small things that made them laugh. For the first time in a long while, Christina felt completely at ease, as though all the weight of her past fears and doubts had melted away. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of what they were building together. As the evening came to a close, Alexander leaned across the table, his hand reaching for hers. "Christina," he said, his voice soft, but filled with meaning. I've never been this honest with anyone before. Not like this. Not about what I really want, or what I'm feeling. But with you, it feels natural. I don't want to keep hiding." Christina felt a lump form in her throat. She had been so afraid of being vulnerable, of letting someone in. But now, with Alexander, it felt different. She realized that she didn't want to hide either. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. I'm not afraid of what we could be." Alexander smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "Then let's take this one step at a time, together," he said, his voice steady and full of hope. Christina nodded, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just love. It was trust. It was understanding. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth holding on to. The evening ended with a promise to see each other again soon. But this time, it wasn't just about a dinner. It was about the future. A future they both knew could be something real, something lasting. And as Christina walked home that night, she couldn't help but smile. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like everything. As the weeks passed, Christina and Alexander continued to build something that neither of them had expected. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day, and the more they spent time together, the more they realized that what they had was real. They weren't just teaching each other lessons about leadership and empathy anymore. They were sharing their lives, their vulnerabilities, and their hopes for the future. Christina had never imagined that she would find herself in this position, but now, standing beside Alexander, she couldn't deny the depth of what they were building. She had always valued her independence, her ability to live life on her own terms. But with Alexander, she didn't feel like she was losing herself. She felt like she was growing, expanding, becoming a version of herself she had always wanted to be but never knew how to achieve. Alexander, on the other hand, had started to feel more at peace with himself. His world had always been about power, control, and success. But through his time with Christina, he had started to see that there was more to life than just those things. He wanted something more, something meaningful. He wanted a connection that wasn't built on status or wealth, but on honesty and trust. The night they shared dinner at the small bistro had been a turning point for both of them. There was something about that evening, something simple but profound, that made them both realize they were ready to take a step forward. But even with the growing closeness between them, they both knew that this wasn't just about being together for the sake of it. This was about something much deeper. Alexander had started to talk about the future, about the things he wanted to do, the changes he wanted to make in his life. Christina had listened, absorbing his words, but she couldn't help but wonder what that future would look like for both of them. Would their paths truly align, or would their differences pull them apart? As if on cue, Alexander invited her to another dinner, this time at his apartment. It was a quiet evening. Just the two of them, no distractions. When she arrived, the familiar warmth of his presence wrapped around her. He was waiting for her at the door, a welcoming smile on his face. "Come in," he said, opening the door wider. "I thought we could have a quiet night, just talk." Christina smiled, feeling at ease in his presence. As they settled in, Alexander made them both a simple dinner, the kind of meal that felt personal, not like the extravagant dinners they had attended together before. It was just a few dishes, pasta, a salad, and some wine. But in that moment, with the soft lighting and the calm, quiet atmosphere, it felt more intimate than anything they had shared before. They ate, talked, and laughed. It wasn't just about business or expectations. It was about getting to know each other in a deeper way. As the night wore on, the conversation turned more personal. They talked about their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. For the first time, Christina felt completely comfortable sharing her thoughts with him. She talked about her childhood, about growing up in a small town and moving to the city with nothing but hope and determination. She told him about her struggles, the challenges she had faced, and the walls she had built around herself to protect her heart. Alexander listened intently, his gaze never leaving hers. "I didn't know that," he said softly. "I had no idea you had been through so much." Christina shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We all have our stories," she said. "I guess I've just learned to keep mine to myself." "You don't have to anymore," Alexander replied, his voice full of sincerity. "You don't have to be alone in this." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment, She didn't know how to respond. But she could see it in his eyes, the same sincerity, the same warmth that had drawn her to him from the very beginning. She realized then that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of the past and move forward with him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he said, reaching across the table and taking her hand in his. "We're in this together, Christina. Whatever happens, we're in it together." The weight of his words settled in her chest. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, truly understood. They didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found each other, and that they were willing to face whatever came next, side by side. As the evening ended, they walked to the door together. Alexander kissed her gently on the cheek, his hand lingering on hers. "I'm looking forward to whatever comes next," he said softly. Christina smiled, her heart full. "Me too," she whispered, before stepping out into the night. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Months passed, and Christina and Alexander's connection only deepened. They had built a life together, one not defined by wealth or status, but by mutual respect, trust, and understanding. What had started as a partnership based on professional growth had transformed into something much more meaningful. As their relationship evolved, so did their lives. Christina, who had once kept her emotions tightly guarded, now felt a freedom she had never known before. She had allowed herself to open up to Alexander, and in return, he had shown her what it truly meant to be seen and heard. She no longer had to hide parts of herself. Alexander had proven to her that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength. It was the key to real connection. Meanwhile, Alexander had changed in ways he hadn't thought possible. His empire was no longer his sole focus. Instead, he focused on people, the ones who truly mattered. He learned to listen, to see beyond the numbers and profits, and to value the human connections that made life worth living. Christina had taught him that the most important thing in life was not success, but the relationships you built along the way. They both found fulfillment not in what they owned, but in each other. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Alexander's apartment, watching the city lights sparkle beneath them, Christina turned to him. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with meaning. Alexander smiled, his gaze meeting hers. "We have. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness, Christina. But here we are." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of contentment that had eluded her for so long. "I used to think I had to do everything alone," she said quietly. "I thought I could build my life without anyone else. But now, I realize I don't want to. I want to build it with you." Alexander wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You're not alone anymore, Christina. You never will be." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just his words. It was the sincerity in them that made her believe. They had built something special together, something that couldn't be measured in money or success. It was a connection that ran deeper than anything either of them had ever imagined. They had found something real, something worth holding on to. As they sat there, in the quiet comfort of each other's company, Christina realized how much she had changed. She had come to embrace love, trust, and connection in a way she never thought possible. With Alexander, she had found a partner who not only saw her strengths but accepted her flaws. And he had done the same for her. They were no longer two separate people navigating the world alone. They were a team, a unit, and together, they could face whatever the future held. The future was no longer a frightening unknown. It was a journey they would take together, hand in hand. And as the night deepened, with the city sprawling beneath them, they knew that no matter what came next, they were ready for it. Because together, they had already found everything they needed. A life built on trust, love, and a connection that had started as something small, but had grown into something magnificent. They had found their way to each other, and that was enough. Discover the power of love and personal growth in these touching stories that will leave you inspired. As Christina and Alexander navigate their evolving relationship, they face challenges, embrace vulnerability, and learn the importance of trust and connection. From their first meaningful conversation to their quiet, heartfelt moments together, these touching stories explore the depth of human emotion and the transformative power of love. Through their shared experiences, they realize that true happiness doesn't come from wealth or status, but from the connections we build with others. In this journey of self-discovery, both Christina and Alexander teach each other valuable lessons about embracing change, stepping out of our comfort zones, and being open to the unknown. The touching stories unfold with moments of tenderness, as they each confront their fears and realize that together, they can face anything life brings. With every step they take, they grow closer, and their bond strengthens, reminding us all of the beauty that comes from accepting love and vulnerability. These touching stories show us that it's never too late to change, to love, and to allow someone else into our lives. The transformation of their relationship is a reminder that life is full of surprises and that love, trust, and understanding are the true keys to happiness. These touching stories are more than just a tale of romance. They are a reflection of the human experience, full of growth, compassion, and the belief that together, we can create something extraordinary.